The opening scene begins with a Mississippi prison graveyard, where some prisoners are burying the bodies of two inmates, Rayford Gibson and Claude Banks. We also see Willie Long, an elderly prisoner in a wheelchair, pouring moonshine into their graves. One of the prisoners asks Willie if Ray and Claude were his friends. Willie responds that he was already imprisoned when the two arrived in 1932. He then starts sharing the past, and the movie flashes back to 1932 and features a Harlem club where Ray and Claude meet for the first time. Ray appears to be a pickpocket who frequents the Harlem club, whereas Claude is a bank teller who is currently with his girlfriend at the same club. A few moments later, Ray follows Claude to the restroom to pick his pocket. However, before Ray can make a move, some thugs approach Claude and loot all of his money. Soon after, Ray goes to Claude and hugs him firmly, pretending to be his old friend. In the process, he steals his empty wallet. Now, since neither of them has money to pay in the club, they're brought to Spanky, the club owner. Spanky orders his men to bind and drown Claude in a water tank. Meanwhile, Ray tries to help Claude by offering a deal to Spanky. They'll drive a truck to Mississippi and bring a load of moonshine. Hearing this, Spanky agrees and orders his men to pull Claude out of the water. Following this, the two travel to Mississippi, and along the way, Ray shows him a silver watch that his father had apparently given him. However, Claude suspects that it's one of the stolen items. Throughout the journey, they disagree with each other's perception. After a while, they stop at a restaurant to eat, unaware that only white people are allowed to dine there. When Claude still demands pie, the restaurant owner pulls out a gun and forces them to leave. After a long ride, they arrive at their destination and load moonshine into their truck. However, before they can return, they notice a casino and decide to try their luck. Ray immediately starts gambling, while Claude is approached by a woman who attempts to entrap him. Ray even bets his father's silver watch while gambling, but he loses it all to a cheat. When he realizes he's been duped, it's too late because the cheater has already left. Later, Claude approaches Ray, and he's also entrapped by the woman, who takes the remaining money from him, leaving the two penniless. On the other hand, the sheriffs confront Winston, the same cheater. Sheriff Pike and Winston appear to have personal hatred for each other, and as a result, Pike murders him. A few moments later, Ray and Claude are walking towards their truck when Winston's dead body falls on Claude, perplexing them. Ray then quickly searches Winston's pocket but doesn't find his father's watch. At the same time, some people arrive and hold the two at gunpoint before transporting them to a police station. Following this, Sheriff Pike cleverly frames them in a murder case, and the court sentences them to life in prison. In the next scene, Ray, Claude, and other criminals are brought to the Mississippi prison, where the warden and his assistant Bob explain the prison rules. According to the warden, anyone attempting to cross the gun line will be shot immediately. After the briefing, they all enter their cells and join the rest of the prisoners. From the following day, all of them are assigned to hard physical labor jobs. During a lunch break, Ray and Claude talk to the other prisoners, including Willie, about their crimes. The majority of the detainees appear to be charged with murder. When Ray and Claude are asked about their crime, Ray pretends to be a dangerous killer and fakes murdering several people. A short time later, a fat prisoner named Goldmouth demands bread, which Ray refuses. He also threatens Goldmouth with death if he doesn't stay away from him. This enrages Goldmouth, so he decides to engage in a one-on-one fist fight. During the fight, Ray is beaten up, but he isn't ready to give up. As the days pass, Ray and Claude become accustomed to the prison and its inmates. One day, Ray informs the inmates about his dream of opening a nightclub with the name Ray's Boom Boom Room. On the same night, the inmates want to hear more about his nightclub, so Ray helps them imagine having fun in his Boom Boom Room. However, Claude is out of this because he believes it's all just crap. After a while, Bob interrupts their fun time and orders everyone to sleep. In the midst of all this, Claude considers petitioning the court for his release and enlists the help of his lawyer girlfriend, Melvin. One day, when the two meet, she inquires if he wants to appeal for Ray as well. Claude immediately refuses, as he believes that everything that's going on is because of Ray. Later, while working, Ray approaches him and reveals that he has a map that can lead them out of the prison. However, Claude refuses to be a part of it and walks away. A few days later, Claude receives a letter from Melvin informing him that his appeal has been denied. Following this, he goes back to Ray and inquires about his map plan, expressing his desire to be involved in it. Ray is initially enraged by Claude's selfish behavior, prompting them to fight, but they soon decide to carry out their plan. The same night, the two run into the woods. While fleeing, Claude asks for the map, and Ray hands him a self-drawn map. He reveals that the map is a forgery, and that he just pretended to have one because he knew Claude wouldn't agree to the escape plan without some convincing evidence. Following this, they continue to run, but Ray becomes entangled in a fence wire, and as a result, they are apprehended. The two are then taken to the superintendent, who lives there with his daughter Mary Rose. The superintendent asks his daughter how they should punish the two escapees, to which Mary replies, "A week in the hole." Years pass, and the world is at a war for the second time. People outside the prison seem to be fighting for freedom, while those inside appear to be fantasizing about getting out. After some weeks of hard physical labor, life in prison settles down to baseball games, talent shows, and even a barbecue at one point. Knowing that Claude has a good knowledge of baseball games, the warden appoints him to be in charge of the prison baseball team. 12 years pass, and one day the prison welcomes several more inmates. One of them appears to be mentally unstable. His name is Can't Get Right. In the next scene, the prisoners are practicing baseball, and Can't Get Right is watching the game with Ray. Shortly after, Can't Get Right expresses his desire to play, so Claude gives him a chance to bat. To everyone's surprise, Can't Get Right hits a home run every time. One day, Mary, who has grown up, returns home after finishing her studies, and the prisoners are drawn to her beauty. Can't Get Right, like the other inmates, falls in love with her at first sight. The next day, the prison warden introduces Claude to a scout for the Negro Leagues named Stan Blocker. Stan inquires about Can't Get Right because the Negro Leagues are looking for new talent. Later that day, several people, including Stan and Mary, arrive at the prison ground to watch the baseball game. Can't Get Right keeps staring at Mary throughout the match, and she also smiles back. At the match, he again hits a home run, leading his team to victory. After the match, Ray and Claude have a brief conversation with Stan, who claims that there will be no racism in baseball games in the next 5 years. Ray and Claude pretend to be Can't Get Right's managers, hoping to get a free ride out of prison when he's recruited by the Negro Leagues. A few years later, Mary gives birth to a baby boy, but the superintendent is shocked to see that his grandson is black. This enrages him, so he compares the baby's face to the color of the prisoner's face to find out the father. As soon as the superintendent reaches Can't Get Right, Mary demands her baby back. When the superintendent asks if anyone knows anything, all of the inmates step forward, each claiming to be the baby's father. As a result, they make fun of the superintendent, prompting him to drive away. One fine day, an inmate named Biscuit informs Ray that he'll be going home the following month. Ray says he must be happy, but Biscuit doesn't want to return home because he cannot face his parents after being in jail. Despite the consolation, Biscuit starts running towards the restricted gun line in order to end his life. The other inmates try to stop him, but he doesn't, and as a result, an officer shoots him. After some days, Can't Get Right shows a letter to Ray and Claude that mentions the pardon, implying that Stan has released him from jail. After learning this, Ray and Claude approach Stan and inquire as to why their names aren't mentioned in the pardon. Stan claims that the two lack the skills that Can't Get Right has. Following this, Can't Get Right gets into a car after handing Claude his baseball. As soon as he leaves, Claude vents his rage on Ray, blaming him for everything wrong that has happened as of late. After their heated argument, the two stop talking to each other. Eventually, the years pass and the inmates die one after the other, leaving behind their memories. After 28 years, Willie is transferred to the prison's infirmary, but old Ray and Claude are still not talking. One day, Claude notices the superintendent's wife baking pie and is desperate to eat it. He crosses the gun line, dodging bullets, and begins eating the hot pie like a rapacious person. Following this, the prison warden makes him stand on the empty bottles as his punishment. The warden also orders Ray to shoot Claude in exchange for an early release. However, Ray refuses, so the warden makes him stand on the bottles beside Claude. Ray and Claude speak for the first time in 28 years. Ray inquires about the taste of the pie, to which Claude responds that it burned his tongue, causing them to laugh. The next morning, the two learn that they've been transferred to the superintendent's mansion. In the next scene, we see Claude working as the superintendent's assistant and Ray as a gardener. One day, the superintendent questions Claude about their time in prison. When Claude says 40 years, the superintendent claims that's a long time for any crime. Claude responds that it's even longer when one's innocent. The next day, Claude is starting the superintendent's car to drive him outside. Ray is envious because Claude is going out for the first time in 40 years. Following this, Claude drives the superintendent to his destination, and while he's away, Claude observes the people who are living freely with their families. A few moments later, he is shocked to see the superintendent return with a guy who is none other than Sheriff Pike. As soon as they arrive home, Claude informs Ray. The next day, Ray and Claude are out hunting with the superintendent and Pike when Ray notices his father's silver watch in his hand. Ray then realizes how Pike framed them for the murder, and in a fit of rage, he seizes Pike's gun and points it at him. Claude tries to stop him, but when Pike grabs his pistol, the superintendent shoots him to death. Later, the superintendent gives his statement to the police, claiming that it was an accident. After learning about the entire incident and how they were framed, the superintendent feels bad for the two, as they spent 40 years in prison for nothing. He informs them that he'll get the pardon papers ready the next day. Unfortunately, the superintendent passes away in the bathroom the same day, hence killing their last hope. In the next scene, Ray and Claude have been transferred to the infirmary due to their old age. Claude still has an escape plan, but Ray is no longer interested in it. The same night, the infirmary catches fire, trapping Claude inside. Ray enters the building to save his friend, but they never return. The next day, the police discover two burned-out bodies inside. The movie returns to the present, where one of the prisoners asks about Claude's last plan. Willie claims that Claude figured that if he could steal a couple of bodies from the morgue, he could set fire to the infirmary, hide in the fire brigade, and slip away in the morning. This way, the police would believe that the two stolen bodies were of them. After hearing all this, the prisoner asks Willie about what makes him think the plan didn't work, to which Willie responds, "I never said it didn't work." In the final scene, we see Ray and Claude enjoying a baseball game at the Yankee Stadium.